Hello. Hi everyone. Welcome to Automation Testing Training Program. In the today's class, we are going to discuss about the most important concept, which is the locators. You all know that the locators is the most important stuff to work on any kind of an automation testing tool. So if you have a look here, the heart of end-to-end tests for any web page is finding a DOM elements. Great. Interacting with them and getting information about the current state of your application. This topic will locate how we are going to identify multiple object properties. Okay. So here, generally, if you remember about the global variables which we studied in a previous class, wherein which we used an element by or the true global variables. We studied about three global variables. One is a browser and another one is an element and the last one is a by. Okay, protractor exports a global function element. Okay, so this is a global function which takes a locator and it will return element finder, which will return object identification. This will return an object identification. This function will find a single element. It will identify a single object in a browser. It's not going to identify multiple objects. It will identify only a single object. If you need to manipulate multiple objects, then you need to use element.all function. Okay, if your intention is to perform only operation on a single object, you can use an element by command. If your intention is to identify multiple objects, we can use element.all command. Okay, we can use the element.all command to perform this one. See, let's study about the element for now. Whenever you identified this particular element, you can perform various actions like a click, get a text, send a keys, the various kinds of operations which we performed on an object in a web driver. The same thing we are going to perform it out over here. These are the core way to interact with the elements and get the information from it. So these are all the various commands which will interact with the applications. Okay, protractor exports locator factories on the global by object. Okay, it's going to export by objects. That's fine. So what we are going to study, see here, I have a listed down few properties which I encountered basically. Okay, in my application, basically I encountered certain object properties. I have a listed down those properties here. For sure, majority of the application will contain these properties that will be helpful for us to handle those operations. Great. So here the point is basically ID property. If any object is having an ID property, how would we know? So a simple example is, assume that I would like to identify the properties for this text field. Okay, I would like to identify the various properties for this text field. So the only thing what you need to do is right click, inspect. The way how we have used in Selenium, the same object identification mechanism we are using. See, as of now, this object doesn't contain any ID property. If any object has an ID property, okay, the two objects don't have any ID property, that's fine. If any object has an ID property like ID is equal to 123, then the way we can write down our WebDriver program is, or else the protractor program is, element by dot ID. So here this is the syntax. Okay, ID, assume that the ID is a 123 for that object. Identify this particular object dot click. So this is how we need to write down. Okay, dot click, this is how you need to write down. So this is a simple program how you need to specify the ID property. Element by dot ID, you just need to specify the ID property for that object. Okay, you just need to specify the ID property of the object. Whatever the ID value might be, you can just pass that ID property value here. Great. So let's see this text field. Okay, right click, inspect. This text field, let me perform once again, inspect. This text field is having an ng model. So this property ng model, assume that this object is having an ng model. In such a cases, the syntax is element by dot model. So let me make a note here. Element by dot model and the name on that particular model. So in the current example, the name on that particular model is your name. Copy the your name and paste it out over here. So this is the way you need to write down. So if that particular object is having an ID, you need to write down like this. If that object is having an ng model, see here guys, if you clearly observe, it has an ng model. See, ng model, your name. If an object is having an ng model, then you need to write down a command like this, which is element by model. Okay, element by dot model is the way how you need to write down this. Okay, element by dot model is the way how can we write down or how can we identify that particular object. For suppose if an object is having a class name like this, okay, if an object is having a class name like this, okay, class name btn space, it's a button, here we have a space, button primary. Assume that your class name is like this, just button primary, and you have these are two class names, button primary and as well as this one. Then okay, let me copy this one there. Okay, let me copy this one there to this document. Okay, so here, then if it is having just this class name, then I can go for element by dot css. Whenever the class name is there, I can directly go for the css by dot primary. I can define this particular primary. So if it is having just this one, button hyphen primary, then I can use a css like this. For suppose if there is a space between a btn and a btn primary, then you need to write down element by dot css in the single quotes btn, in place of a space replace with a dot btn hyphen primary. The only modification what we did out over here is we have a space between these two. I replaced that particular space with, okay, I replaced that particular space with a dot here. Just with a dot, I replace it here. This is the most commonly used property. If an object is having a class name directly, we can use a CSS. If an object is having a class name with some spaces, wherever the space is there, just replace with a dot. Okay, just replace it with a dot. That's it. Great. And let's see the another property here. In this document, if an object is having a ng click, okay, ng click, let me show you a small example. The edit me, right click on an edit me, inspect element. Okay, right click on a edit me, inspect element. See here, it is having ng click, and on a click it's gonna perform this operation. Okay, ng click, this is the one. So assume that if your object is like this, and even for this object the class name is a button space a button primary. So in this cases you can use css button dot button primary. This is one way. And it has an ng click also. If an object is having an ng click, how we are gonna handle that? Here is a documentation. So ng click, it is having a function name. That's what whatever we have. Then you need to write down this syntax. Okay, let me update this syntax here. Element by dot css, open the braces here. It is an ng click and specify the function name. So I'm writing down for the current object element. Okay, element. Okay, by dot css, open the braces, close the braces. I'm just closing these braces. So here again I need to open these two braces. Here the function is ng click. What is the function inside the ng click? Inside the ng click, this is the one. Copy the content inside that and replace it here. Ng click. Function should be represented in the double quotes. That's it. Automatically, it will try to identify this ng click and it will perform that. Usually whenever you are working on an Angular applications, you are gonna get these kind of ng clicks, these kind of a class names and ng models, these kind of an operations we can get it in our real time. Like this, we are gonna write down ng clicks. Majority of the Angular application contains ng click, class name, ng model, which we have studied. Okay, great. What is the another locator strategy? Button text. If there is a button and if there is a text on that particular button, if you have a text on that particular button, see, this is a button. The tag for this particular edit me is, okay, let me show you. The tag for this edit me is a button. Okay, this is the object. For this object, the tag name is a button and the text on that particular button is an edit me. If I have this functionality edit me, how to handle this edit me then? All right, how to handle this edit me means the button text is, you can directly write down a command which is a button text. So out over here, I'm just making a note. So element by dot button text. I'm going for the button text and the text on that particular button is edit me. So I have a given that particular text on that particular button and I have a given this. And then if you have any kind of a link and if you would like to get by its link text, so here there are certain links like learn and all those things. In order to go with this link text, the text present on that link is a learn. So how can we identify the text with this link means element by link text. Instead of a button text, we are replacing it with a link text. The button text is gonna replace with a link text. That's it. And then if you would like to identify by its href, okay, in order to identify any links, there are two different options. You can either go with the by link text dot click, or else you can use a css wherein which a href, in which I would like to specify the text on that particular link. So here, text on the link I'm gonna specify out over here. Element by dot css, as it is a link, I'm giving a tag name as a href star is equal to, I'm just specifying this particular object. Great. For suppose if your application is having a tabular format like this, okay, if your application is having a tabular format like this, then how we are going to handle it means by its XPath specifying that the table name contains the table and then it contains the text inside the table. First you need to identify the table and then you need to switch to that particular table to perform these operations. Okay, you need to identify the table like this. This is a combination of multiple properties here. So I am identifying the table first. In that particular table, I am identifying the text. So these are very rare scenarios where we encounter. So it is a table. Inside the table, there are multiple texts. So you need to identify the table first, and within the table, you need to go for these text. So this is the way how you need to specify. Okay, and a protractor command usually should be like this. Okay, that's fine, as we are already studying and we are going to work on these few more commands. That's not a big deal, we can study this particular stuff. So the ultimate point out over here is these are the most frequently used locators: id, class name, ng model, ng click, and these are all the various locators: text present, link present, these are all things. And depending on the organization and depending on an application, we can use these locators. In my application, 75% of the objects, they have an ID property. Okay, 75% of the objects, they have an ID property. Remaining objects, they have a ng click. I used this ng click and I performed all my operations. Okay, so this is the basic info about locators. And we have a ng repeater. Okay, we have an ng repeat or ng repeater in Angular. First of all, we need to know this one. Let's look into this ng repeater in the next concept. Okay, that's all I have. See you again in the next session. Thank you. Bye bye.